provided by Access Fort Wayne are a service of the Allen County Public Library. The views and opinions expressed do not necessarily represent those of Access Fort Wayne, the Allen County Public Library, or any other supporting organizations. For more information about creating your own television program with Access Fort Wayne, call 421-1250.
Here we go. Yep. Hello, and welcome to our show, The American Veteran. I'm Dale Parrish, your host. Carl Fowler is co-host, and our guest today is Joe Vaughan. Joe was on our previous program. This show, she'll be talking about her service to the military families. Welcome to our show, Joe.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
Well, thank you. I'm surprised you have time to be our guest.
Well, some things are really important to me, and this is something I'm very passionate about, and so I'm willing to give my time and service it in any way that I can.
Yeah.
Okay.
You're a very busy lady. I said provide service to military families. What does that entail?
Well, working for and with military families is a part of my work and my job, but it's also a part of who I am. I've been in a military family since the day I was born. My father was a World War II veteran, and my grandfather was a World War I veteran. And my brother served in Vietnam, and my son has served in Iraq, and is still currently serving. And so it's been a part of my life all the way through. And in my work at my job, we also work with the families, the dependents of veterans. Sometimes they're a child or a spouse of a disabled veteran and or someone who has been deceased. So having been a family member all of my life, I've been keenly aware that even though it's the veteran who signs on the line and it's the veteran who goes forward and deploys, the family serves as well. But they serve in a very different kind of way. Yeah. The family is the one who stays behind and keeps things going. And if you talk to any family member, especially the spouses of veterans who deploy, they will tell you that the week that the veteran deploys is the week that the car breaks down, the refrigerator quits, the washing machine overflows, and your babysitter backs down, and all of those kinds of things happen. And they're the ones who keep things going. And it's difficult for the families as well.
Yeah.
It's quite a burden on their shoulders, isn't it?
Sometimes it can be really difficult, and that's why we have wonderful agencies and organizations like the Blue Star Mothers, Allen County, Blue Star Mothers here in Fort Wayne. We have the family support assistance groups through the National Guard and the Air Guard. There are a lot of different organizations that help out, and especially in those kinds of situations. It's very important to belong to those kinds of groups. When my son deployed was my first experience being in a family assistance program. And it was really nice to have other spouses, moms, whoever, who could say, yep, I just got a letter from my kid, he's okay, or I got a letter from my daughter and she's, fine, this is what she's doing and where she is. And we could compare notes and kind of keep each other aware of what the real truth was, because a lot of information gets funneled out through news organizations that's pretty inaccurate, and so you have to kind of sort through some of those things to find out what's really happening with your person, because the information may be delayed, it may have been combined with other news stories, and so you just get a little taste of what's actually happening, and it can be alarming for families to just get a little bit of information.
So they can look for more information?
They can look for more information from each other because they get information from their veteran or their service member. They get information updates from their units. When they deploy, they have a rear detachment who stays back and kind of takes care of things at home. And so those who are deployed and they're in command often send newsletters back or letters of information back to the family members, and it's only for the eyes of the family members.
Okay, so there's moral support there.
There's moral support, and it's really wonderful.
Yeah.
I remember very distinctly when my brother was serving in the Navy. It was during the Vietnam War, and he was on board the USS Enterprise. And they had a fire on board the ship. It's an aircraft carrier, nuclear aircraft carrier. And they had a fire on board the ship, and my brother's job on the flight deck was a fireman. And unfortunately, or fortunately, on that day, you decide there happened to be a news crew on board the ship there to cover some dignitaries that were there. When the fire happened, they were showing live news reports of that in action. And so my father came home from work, and we already had the news on. He said, "Look at the news. Don's ship is on fire." And we watched this live enactment of this horrendous tragedy that was happening on board the ship. We knew my brother was in there. We could tell he was on the fire hose. We saw the explosions that blew him up. So this is a family member seeing this live. You have to think about how traumatic that would have been for my parents at that
very
time.
much so.
I was, I believe, 16, somewhere around there. So I was aware, very much aware of what was happening. All of us totally helpless to do anything. At the end of the newscast, they were showing all of the sailors lining up for a telephone to call home and say they were okay. We didn't get that phone call, but we knew my brother had been in the front part. And his job was to help get the pilots out of the jet planes that were already loaded with ordnance. And that's what was exploding, because as they caught fire, they were exploding out these 500-pound bombs. And we didn't hear anything. So my father tried getting information through the Red Cross, through the recruiting stations, through anybody he could find. And having served in the Navy, on the USS Intrepid, my father knew exactly what was going on and what was happening, but we could not get any information about my brother. It wasn't until 5 days later that a Navy car pulled into our driveway with 2 officers in their dress whites. And when they did that, my mother, of course, assumed the worst.
Your heart just sinks.
Your heart just sinks. In fact, she fainted at the doorway. And they came in and picked her up off the floor. One started making coffee, and they were trying to tell her, "No, your son is alive. We did find him. He's in the hospital in Tripler." However, the Navy had already declared him dead. And that's why they had been sent out to our house. And then bad news, but then they found out he was alive. So it was good news, bad news. It was a horrible situation. But that was the beginning of a lifetime nightmare for my parents, because my brother was severely wounded. He had been hit by shrapnel 4 times. And the last explosion, the shrapnel had entered his back and come through the front. And so they did surgery on him on the flight deck without anesthetics. And then choppered him out to the hospital. And of course, he wasn't in any condition to call home.
No, I guess not.
So one of his shipmates had a grandfather who had come to find the shipmate, and he saw my brother and he said, "Do your parents know that you're alive?" And he said, "No." He said, "Can you get in touch with them?" And so he did. And so that gentleman, I thank him. I don't know his name, but I'm very grateful that he told my parents and everyone that my brother was really alive.
Yeah.
But when my brother came home, he, of course, was not the same. And that was my first beginning to understand post-traumatic stress. The nightmares, the night terrors, reliving the fire. He lost everyone in his compartment. He was the only one who survived. And they were all flight deck people.
Wow.
Yeah.
So again, you deal with survivor guilt.
Right.
And it was very difficult at that time, because who wanted to hear about Vietnam vets? The public didn't welcome them back.
Yeah.
And my brother actually, when he went discharged from the Navy, he was still in his uniform, walking down the sidewalk to go be discharged, and he was spit on by people.
We've talked to people.
And so that that's quite an experience.
Yeah.
You've given everything. You've lost all of your friends.
Mm-hmm.
You're wounded in ways that will never heal. He is completely disabled now, and he's living in Florida, if you can call that living. And so it's been a very difficult thing, but I was one person who would listen to his story and listen to him tell it over and over, where he was, what he did. And actually there's a gentleman who wrote a book about it, and it's called The Big E, Fire, Trial by Fire.
Yeah.
And in that he details my brother's service and getting wounded and that kind of thing. And they had to resuscitate him, I think, 3 times before they got him back. But long story short, when my brother was trying to get his VA benefits, the VA was asking him for written documentation of where he was, that he had gotten wounded, etc. He couldn't just open his shirt and say, look, here's my scar, it goes all the way down. They needed written proof or affidavits. And so I found the book that was written and sent him a copy because they have full color pictures of everything. And he took it to the VA, and they said, well, I guess you do have written documentation. You were there. You're mentioned in this book as being a survivor.
Yeah.
And so, but it took 5 days for the military to let us know what was happening with my brother. I understand the operation security. I understand the difficulty of informing that many family members all over the country, finding them and doing that.
Yeah.
But for the family who's sitting there waiting, that is tough.
Oh,
very,
yeah.
very tough.
Sure.
I can only imagine. I can only imagine.
So move forward. For several years, I was in a relationship with a gentleman who was a Green Beret in Vietnam and had gotten wounded his second tour. And so I got to learn firsthand about hand signals, what this means, and if there was any danger coming along, if we happened to be walking on the sidewalk, his first automatic reaction was to swoop me to the back.
Get you out of harm's way.
Get me out of harm's way so that he could deal with whatever was coming.
Right.
And he trained my children also in self-defense, which has really come to great advantage for my daughter. And she was able to use it at one time to protect herself, which was great. But then we moved forward to my son being in the military. And I have to give my son the most props because he's a man of honor and integrity. He's a strong Christian man, and he's a good father to his children. And he served in, his first deployment was to Sinai in Egypt. And the military has a wonderful way of saying you're assigned to a certain place for this number of months. However, they also have the right to change their mind as to how long that's going to be. So his first deployment ended up to be 15 months, and that's a long time to be away from your family. He had a young daughter at that time, and it was difficult for her to be away from her dad that long. Then he was only home for a couple of months, and he got his orders to go to Iraq. And I have to tell you, when your son or daughter is going into harm's way, you know it's harm's way. Your whole life changes. You stop turning your phone off. You carry your phone with you every minute of every day, praying to God it doesn't ring with any bad news. You watch the news and try to figure out what's going on, where they are, hoping and praying for letters, phone calls. But when they would go on missions, everything stops.
You're living on the edge.
You live on the edge for that entire amount of time.
Exactly.
And he was supposed to be deployed for a year. That was 14 months, and then it became 18 months. And in the middle of that first deployment, it's about this time of year, he had gotten hit with rocket-propelled grenade shrapnel and opted to stay and not be medevaced. He said, I'm good to go. Let's get this over with and get back to work. So he did. But that was my first of those phone calls where you answer the phone and they say, "Is this Ms. Vaughan?" "Yes, it is." "This is Colonel so-and-so. I regret to inform you." That should never be the first words that they say.
Well, it should say, "I'm glad to inform you."
I am happy to inform you your son is alive. And so, like you said, your heart drops to the floor. And then they say, "But your son is okay. He's a very stubborn person. He wants to get back out there and work." Fine. Very proud of him. Just take good care of him while you've got him. And then a couple weeks later, I got an email that said he was being medevac to Germany because he got too close to an IED. Again, 5 full days of not knowing.
News.
No news. Not one word. Where he was, except that he was very seriously injured. That was all I knew.
Mm-hmm.
And during that time, having gone through this once before in my life with a loved one, I said, I'm not waiting 5 days. I said, I got to find out something. So I tried calling everyone I knew who was in the military, and at that time I was also consulting with post-traumatic stress for different units, and no one could tell me anything because all the information was redacted or kept in secret. So it wasn't until they actually got him on the last of several flights to move him from Germany to the States, and they knew where he was going to be, that I could get any information. And so when he was out of harm's way, then they could tell me. But that Operation Security is very difficult for the families, but it's so necessary.
Yeah.
It's very necessary to protect those folks who are very vulnerable at that point.
Right.
And so he came home. We were able to go see him in Georgia and be very glad that I had my son back. And every time I would see him, I'm reminded that I am very blessed because we have Gold Star mothers, and I am a Blue Star mother. Gold Star mothers have lost their child, and mine is still alive, and I can still call him. I can still go up and hug him. I can visit him, and that means everything to me to be able to have. And that, gentlemen, is why I'm very passionate about what I do for IPFW.
We understand.
I can understand that.
Yeah.
In the military, you lose buddies, you lose friends, so forth. So we know somewhat what the Gold Star versus the Blue Star meaning is.
And there are a lot of folks too who have family members who came back from war and just were not able to navigate that reintegration or to deal with the post-traumatic stress or the survivor guilt. I remember when my brother came home, the local newspaper did a big write-up about him because he had gotten all these commendations and medals and things like that. He was very angry because he said, I am not a hero. I didn't do anything but my job, and I got wounded in the process. He said the heroes are those guys who we had to wash off the deck. The heroes are the guys who didn't come home. The heroes are those wives and mothers and dads and sisters and brothers who didn't get their person home. And I know when he got back, when they gave him all of those medals, the first thing he did was throw them in the ocean. And that was
meaningless to him.
Meaningless. What was a piece of metal? What does that do?
Exactly.
It doesn't give anything back.
We feel the same way about our brothers that did not come back. Those are our heroes.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Now you said your brother, he was able to talk about it.
He was able to talk about it with me.
With you,
Not most people wouldn't listen, particularly family, but also
they don't understand.
They don't have any understanding, and they're afraid of the emotion, I think, that comes along with it. To see a grown man who's that emotional about all of those losses and the terror of it. And the repeating terror, they want people to just get over it.
Right.
One of the gentlemen that I went to high school with, now remember this was in the late 60s, a lot of the guys from my high school were deploying, going to Vietnam, just whole groups of them at a time. And I remember in particular one of my friends came home. He had been serving in the jungle in Vietnam, and within 24 hours he went from the jungle to home, the farm, He hadn't had a shower yet. They had taken his uniform, they had taken his weapon, and he got home, and his parents told him, well, that part's done, it's over, we're not going to talk about it, we're not going to go there anymore, get out on the tractor and get to work.
But that doesn't erase it up here.
It doesn't erase it up here, and he had real difficulty because he wanted to take his shotgun with him out on the tractor. And his father's like, you don't need a gun, and that kind of thing. But he felt naked without it. I mean, that was their life, in their hands. And unfortunately, he was one of those folks who used a weapon and killed himself shortly thereafter. He didn't survive just a few months. And I remember being very heartbroken that we had nothing to help him at that point.
Right.
And I am so grateful for every opportunity that I get to help at least one person stay alive, find the help they need, help their family member.
I was going to say that drives you, don't it?
Yes, because I know, and he's just one,
Mm-hmm.
Another young man, we got word that he had given his life in Vietnam. He was killed in a rice paddy. And the family got the letter, his last letter, the day of his funeral. Mm-hmm. And he, in his letter, he said, I don't think I'm going to make it much longer because guys are dropping right and left of me everywhere. And so it's very hard, and that, remember, I was in my late teens, and so it's very an impressionable time. And you see all the agony that it causes family.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Right.
So, but there are so many wonderful things now that are happening for families. There are organizations, and there's a lot of help and support in the community for veterans and for their families. When people in a neighborhood know that someone is deploying, quite often the other neighbors rally around and help with mowing the lawn, or do you need a truck, or do you need to have somebody help you take care of your kids so you can go have a cup of coffee or something.
Yeah.
And nowadays it's not just the men that are deploying. It's women, it's moms, and they have young children. Now we have things like Skype and FaceTime. And so if they're in an area where they can get access to the internet, our service members can actually have live time, FaceTime with their families. Granted, it's very limited, but they can actually see that child, and the child can go, oh, there's mommy, or there's daddy, and they're in the screen, and kind of keep those memories alive, especially for the young children who may not remember.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Now, is your son okay?
My son is okay. He is doing very well. He's currently a major in the Michigan Army National Guard. Good. He works at Joint Force Headquarters. He is married to a wonderful woman who was actually a widow of one of the gentlemen who gave his life in service. But they are doing wonderful work. She's a really strong woman, and she supports my son with her whole heart. And she's one of his motivators to keep him moving and doing things like Warrior Dash and all of these special races. They do the Army 10-miler every year. And,
Great.
So they're huge proponents and supporters, and they work very, very hard in their church to help support people.
Mm-hmm.
How many families do you think there is around the area that are military families that need help?
Oh my goodness, there are a lot of them. Let's see, back in 2008, there were 15,000 troops coming back. So you divide those out into families. At school, we have about 800 students who are veterans or serving right now. Okay. And that's in our local area in Northeast Indiana. So if you look at the whole state, that's a very huge number.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. But there are, people like, the Blue Star Mothers and the American Legion and the VFW, and all of those folks are just wonderful about supporting. And we're looking forward, hopefully, to starting an organization for our students on campus with the American Legion, so that they have a local chapter to belong to.
And that's why I asked you, back then, they have a gathering place there where they actually get together. They need to organize something, you know.
Right. And again, it's very difficult when they're commuter students and they're working full time and they're only on campus for the short amount of time that they're taking classes. But we do give them as many opportunities as possible to meet.
Sure, because they need to talk to each other.
Absolutely. And we try to introduce them
to another veteran.
Yes. And when we get them in our office, first thing we do is introduce them to another veteran so that they have a point of contact. Someone to say, hey, I don't know what this is. How am I supposed to do that? Or do you guys know how I can get in touch with? I need a mechanic. I need a babysitter. I need a place to wash my clothes. I need all of those things, the nitty gritties. Where you just need someone who's been there and done that.
Okay, especially somebody that's been wounded and everything this way. Their mind is already occupied.
That's
you might
right.
say.
We had a gentleman who came to our office and eventually started having difficulty walking. And it took a couple of our seasoned veterans to talk him into actually using a wheelchair long enough to get well, because he didn't want to do it. And so they went and got him a wheelchair and said, here, try it out. Here's some wheels. Let's see if we can get you going. And it was really nice to see his response. And he used it long enough to give himself a break and to get the medical help he needed. And now he's walking and he's doing well again. But it took that veteran interaction.
I was going to say he'll remember that his buddies stepped up for him.
That's right. That's right.
And he'll probably pay that forward in the future.
Yes. And that's also really very cool about our office, that they do pay it forward. And every student veteran that I've asked or hired in my office in the last 4 years, or fifth year, why do you want to work in this office? Why are you applying for this position? And always, everyone will say, because I want to help other veterans. Yeah. And they want to help teach them the things that they may have learned the hard way, didn't ask for help, but they are definitely right there to stand up and say, what can I do to help you?
If you put yourself in that veteran's shoes and you're going into a situation like that, and you're thinking you're all alone. Mm-hmm. I got to do this all myself, Mm-hmm. But then to see that there's other people out there to come help you means a lot.
It does. It does. We have folks who have said to us that it's very frightening when they're on campus because it's a big place. There's people everywhere, lots of movement, too many doors to watch, windows to watch, and people walking by, and they don't have their buddies, those battle buddies there to watch their back.
Nobody to lean on.
Right. And so we try to make sure that they have access to friends and other people who can kind of watch the back for them. Mm-hmm. And get them information. I try to also make sure that I have all kinds of resources to give out, live scribe pens to help them if they have neuropathy or can't remember, have difficulty hearing. We did an experiment with laptops. We gave 20 veterans laptops, not laptops, iPads.
Tablets, yeah.
The iPad tablet, and found out what kind of applications that they used most frequently, and then I got to learn some because that worked out well for me. But trying to fit as many resources, and find out what's going on. For instance, I'm a member of the Fort Wayne-based Community Council, and they meet and try to provide speakers and information to all of our veteran families. Yeah. The Northeast Indiana Military Alliance Network meets once a month and provides information about different programs and resources that are available for military families. And that is a great thing to find out what's going on.
Right. We're out of time. Joe, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
Appreciate that.
Thanks for what you're doing for the military.
Thank you.
Veterans. If I can get this out, I hope you enjoyed the show. Remember, freedom is not free. If you see a veteran, someone in uniform, just walk up to them, shake their hand, and say thanks for your service. Thank you, and good night.